Harare, Zimbabwe, a day after President Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe stunned his nation by not announcing his resignation. The 93-year-old leader on Monday ignored an ultimatum from his own party demanding he step down. The missed deadline, which was set by the ruling ZANU-PF party on Sunday, is expected to lead to a move by Parliament to impeach him, a process that could take weeks. The protracted negotiations between military leaders who seized power on Wednesday and Mr. Mugabe have frustrated Zimbabweans who had hoped for a quick resolution to the standoff. Though visibly enfeebled, Mr. Mugabe has shown the negotiating skills that have kept him in power for 37 years. Allies of the military and Emerson Mnangagwa, the vice president whose firing triggered the chain of events leading to the military intervention, urged lawmakers to impeach the president as soon as possible. "We want him out of office immediately." Quote, Christopher Mavangwa, the powerful head of the War Veterans Association, said at a news conference on Monday, urging ruling party lawmakers to work with the opposition to remove the president. He added that war veterans, who helped organize a rally against Mr. Mugabe on Saturday, would stage another one in the coming days. Despite such calls, Mr. Mugabe's swift removal is running into obstacles. For one, the process has never been tested in Zimbabwe, as Mr. Mugabe is the only president the country has known since becoming an independent nation in 1980. Under the Constitution, removing the president from office requires the assent of two-thirds of lawmakers in both the Senate and the National Assembly. ZANU-PF holds such a supermajority in both chambers, but many of its members remain loyal to Mr. Mugabe. Military officers have insisted their takeover was not a coup, and have tried to give their intervention a veneer of legality, portraying it as an attempt to save the ailing Mr. Mugabe from a faction, led by his wife, Grace, that had effectively seized control of the government. But to complete this picture of legality, they need Mr. Mugabe's cooperation, a fact that the president clearly understands and is exploiting, as he reportedly negotiates his future and that of his family. The quandary also helps explain the continued absence of Mr. Mnangagwa, who had been engaged in a long-running feud with the president's wife. Mr. Mugabe had taken his wife's side by firing Mr. Mnangagwa and then trying to have the nation's top military commander, Gen. Constantino Chiwenga, arrested. That led to the military intervention. Military leaders have taken great pains to remove any trace of Mr. Mnangagwa's involvement in the intervention itself, clearly believing that it would damage him politically as he moves to succeed Mr. Mugabe. Mr. Mnangagwa has not been seen in public since he was fired. He has yet to return to Zimbabwe even though ZANU-PF named him as its new leader on Sunday. After expelling Mr. Mugabe from its ranks, his absence has become conspicuous, leaving some allies struggling to explain. Tishinga Dube, a former war veterans minister and an ally of Mr. Mnangagwa, said the former vice president was still in South Africa on Monday. Asked why he had not returned after being named the new head of ZANU-PF, Mr. Dube said, "Well, it's only yesterday." Quote, questioned as to whether Mr. Mnangagwa would return soon, Mr. Dube said, yes, very soon. Maybe even this week. Maybe. Simon K. Moyo, ZANU-PF's spokesman, said he had no idea when Mr. Mnangagwa would return. Asked why the party's new leader had not returned already, Mr. Moyo replied testily, "I don't know." Quote, on November 6, some hours after he was fired, Mr. Mnangagwa decided to flee Zimbabwe, fearing arrest or worse, according to allies, in an escape worthy of his background as a Liberation War veteran and his nickname, the Crocodile. He apparently outmaneuvered Mr. Mugabe's security forces, though he came very close to being caught. Mr. Mnangagwa had private planes belonging to friends ready to take off at the airport, creating the impression that he would fly out of Zimbabwe, said Mr. Mnangagwa, the head of the War Veterans Association. Instead, Mr. Mnangagwa drove in a single vehicle toward neighboring Mozambique, where he has strong military ties, accompanied by a son and a young assistant, wearing a cap. Mr. Mnangagwa, 75, had his passport stamped at the border, but was then recognized by a police officer. Mr. Mnangagwa said. Mr. Mnangagwa's son, a soldier, disarmed the officer, and their vehicle made a U-turn, speeding back into Zimbabwe. After a while, they stopped by the roadside. The young assistant drove the car back to Harare as Mr. Mnangagwa and his son left Zimbabwe on foot. It's a land border. There's no river, so they just used a bush path. Quote, Mr. Mnangagwa said. So he walked into Mozambique. And, of course, Mozambique and friends were waiting for him on the other side. Quote, it wasn't easy. He's not young anymore. Quote, Mr. Mnangagwa said. Though the impending end of the Mugabe era pleased most Zimbabweans, many remained cautious about Mr. Mnangagwa, who was long known for being the president's ruthless enforcer. The way Mugabe has been running this country is the same way Mnangagwa is going to do it, said Catherine Mukwapati, 34, who was walking in central Harare with her 3-year-old daughter. Clarice Madhuku, 38, who was sitting on a bench in Africa Unity Square, said he was skeptical of Mr. Mnangagwa's close ties to the military. The former vice president, he added, had emerged victorious over a rival faction because his own just fortunately won the backing of the army. Quote, still, Mr. Madhuku was hopeful that the economy would improve under Mr. Mnangagwa, who has a reputation for pragmatism and for being open to outside investors. He will likely be a reformist in as far as the economy is concerned. Quote, Mr. Madhuku said, I just hope he will not continue with Mugabe's destructive policies. Yeah.